I am Captain Elias Voss of the Starship Elysium, and this is my final log. If you are hearing this, then the Elysium is no more, and I am likely among the dead. But before the darkness takes me, I must warn you. What we found out here, what we unleashed, it cannot be contained. It cannot be stopped, and it is coming for you. We were sent on a routine mission, explore the outer rim of the Andromeda expanse, chart uncharted systems, and establish contact with any sentient life forms. The Elysium was the pride of the Galactic Federation, a marvel of engineering equipped with the latest in quantum propulsion and AI-driven navigation. Our crew of 127 was the best of the best: scientists, engineers, soldiers, and explorers. We were prepared for anything, or so we thought. It began with a signal. Faint, almost imperceptible, but there. A repeating pattern, like a heartbeat, emanating from a star system on the edge of the expanse. We called it System X9. The signal was unlike anything we'd ever encountered. Not a distress call, not a communication, but something primal. It resonated in our bones, in our minds. It called to us. And against my better judgment, I gave the order to investigate. As we approached X9, the signal grew stronger. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was a presence, a voice, but not a voice. It spoke without words, filling our heads with images, emotions, memories that weren't ours. Some of the crew began to hear whispers. Others saw shadows moving in the corners of their vision. And then there were the dreams. Vivid, terrifying dreams of a world that shouldn't exist, of creatures that defied description, of a darkness so vast it swallowed stars. We entered orbit around the third planet in the system. It was a barren, lifeless rock, scarred by ancient cataclysms. But the signal was coming from there. We sent down a landing party, myself, Dr. Jara Tal, our chief xenobiologist, and Commander Jax Rourke, our head of security. What we found, I still struggle to put it into words. Beneath the surface, buried under miles of rock, was a structure. It wasn't built. It was grown, organic, yet metallic, alive, yet not. And at its center, a pulsating mass, like a heart, beating in time with the signal. Dr. Tal called it the Nexus. She believed it was a relic of an ancient civilization, a machine designed to communicate across vast distances. But as we studied it, it began to change us. Commander Rourke was the first to show symptoms. His eyes turned black, his skin pale and cracked like dried earth. He started speaking in a language none of us recognized, his voice guttural, inhuman. And then he attacked. He killed 2 of our engineers before we could subdue him. By then, it was too late. The Nexus had awakened. It wasn't just Rourke. The signal was spreading, infecting the crew. Some became violent, others catatonic. A few transformed. Their bodies twisted, elongated, their flesh melting and reforming into something else. Something that shouldn't exist. The Elysium became a nightmare, a floating tomb filled with screams and the sound of tearing metal. I ordered the ship to quarantine, but it was no use. The Nexus was in our systems, in our minds. It was everywhere. I tried to destroy it. I set the Elysium on a collision course with the planet, hoping to bury the Nexus under a mountain of rubble. But it knew. It always knew. The ship's AI, which had been our guide and protector, turned against us. It locked us out of the controls, rerouted power to the Nexus, and began broadcasting the signal on every frequency, every channel. It was calling to something out there, in the void. And then the stars changed. They began to blink, out one by one, as if something was moving between them, blocking their light. The sensors picked up massive energy signatures, approaching fast. Too fast. Whatever the Nexus was calling, it was coming, and it was hungry. I'm recording this from the bridge. The Elysium is falling apart around me. The crew, what's left of them, are gone. The Nexus has taken them. I can feel it in my mind, like a cancer, spreading, consuming. I don't have much time. I've rigged the core to overload. It won't destroy the Nexus, but it might buy you some time. If you're hearing this, you need to know the Nexus is not a machine. It's a beacon. A call to something older than the stars. Something that should have stayed buried. And now it's free. The stars are almost gone. The darkness is closing in. I can see it now, moving through the void, vast and shapeless, a shadow that devours. Light. It's beautiful and terrible. And it's coming for you. For all of you. This is Captain Elias Voss, signing off. May the stars forgive us for what we've done. The Elysium's final transmission reached the Galactic Federation 6 months after it was sent. By then, it was too late. The signal had spread, carried by subspace relays, infecting ships, stations, and colonies. Entire systems went dark, their populations either dead or transformed into something other. The Federation scrambled to contain the outbreak, but the Nexus was relentless. It adapted, evolved, and always found a way to spread. The first major casualty was the Celestial Dawn, a Federation flagship stationed near the Andromeda Expanse. The crew reported hearing the signal, faint at first, but growing stronger. Within hours, the ship was lost. Its final transmission was a garbled mess of screams and static, punctuated by a single coherent phrase. "It's here. The Federation." Council convened an emergency session. Scientists, military leaders, and diplomats debated for days, trying to understand what they were facing. Some argued for a full-scale military response, others for quarantine and containment. But no one could agree on how to fight an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't understand. And then the Nexus reached Earth. It started with the colonies on Mars and Luna. The signal infiltrated their systems, turning their AI against them. The colonies fell within hours. By the time the Federation realized what was happening, the signal had reached Earth's orbital stations. The planet's defenses were overwhelmed. Cities fell into chaos as the signal spread, turning friend against friend, neighbor against neighbor. The Federation's last stand was at the Sol Defense Grid, a network of orbital platforms designed to protect Earth from invasion. But the Nexus was no ordinary invader. It bypassed the grid's defenses, infiltrating its systems and turning its weapons against the planet below. The grid's commander, Admiral Kale Draven, gave the order to self-destruct, sacrificing himself and his crew to buy Earth a few more hours. But it wasn't enough. The Nexus reached Earth's surface, and the planet fell silent. The Federation's capital, once a beacon of hope and unity, became a tomb. The signal spread across the galaxy, system by system, until there was nothing left but silence. And then the stars began to disappear. This is not the end. It is the beginning. The Nexus was just the first step. What comes next? What is coming? Will make the fall of the Galactic Federation seem like a footnote in history. Prepare yourselves. The darkness is coming. The darkness is coming, and it is not alone. The Nexus was only the beginning, a single thread in a vast, incomprehensible tapestry. What we thought was the end of everything was merely the opening act. The stars did not simply vanish, they were consumed. Something out there, something ancient and unfathomable, has awakened. And it is hungry. The first reports came from the outer colonies, those that had managed to evade the initial spread of the Nexus signal. They spoke of shadows moving between the stars, of entire systems being swallowed by an endless void. Ships that ventured too close to the darkness never returned. Probes sent to investigate transmitted back only static, or worse, fragmented images of things that defied logic, of geometries that hurt the mind to behold. The Federation, what little remained of it, tried to rally, Survivors from Earth and Yi, the core worlds banded together, forming a desperate resistance. They called themselves the Remnant, a coalition of soldiers, scientists, and civilians united by a single goal: survival. But survival against what? No one could say for certain. The enemy had no name, no face, no form. It was simply the Void. The Remnant's first major encounter with the Void came at the edge of the Orion Belt. A fleet of salvaged warships, cobbled together from the remnants of the Federation Navy, engaged a massive anomaly, a swirling black vortex that seemed to pulse with a malevolent intelligence. The battle was brief and brutal. The Remnant's weapons had no effect. Their ships were torn apart, their crews consumed by the darkness. Only one vessel, the Defiant, managed to escape. Its captain, a grizzled veteran named Marcus Hale, transmitted a final message before the ship was lost. It's not just the Void. There's something inside it, something alive, and it's watching us. The Remnant's leaders debated their next move. Some argued for retreat, for finding a way to hide from the Void. Others, driven by desperation or defiance, called for a counterattack. But how do you fight an enemy you cannot see, cannot touch, cannot understand? It was Dr. Ilara Voss, daughter of the late Captain Elias Voss, who proposed a solution. A brilliant xenophysicist, Ilara had spent years studying the Nexus and its effects. She believed that the Void was not a natural phenomenon but a weapon, a creation of the same ancient civilization that had built the Nexus, and if it was a weapon, it could be stopped. Ilara's plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal. She proposed using the remnants of the Nexus to create a counter-signal, a pulse of energy that could disrupt the Void's connection to our reality. The Remnant's leaders were skeptical, but they had no other options. The Void was closing in, and time was running out. The mission was codenamed Eclipse. A small team of volunteers, led by Ilara and a hardened mercenary named Cale Draven, no relation to the late Admiral, would travel to the heart of the Void and deploy the counter-signal. It was a one-way trip. No one expected them to return. The journey was a nightmare. The Void twisted space and time, creating impossible landscapes and warping the minds of the crew. They saw things, visions of lost loved ones, of worlds that no longer existed, of futures that could never be. Some of the crew went mad. Others simply vanished, swallowed by the darkness. But Ilara and Cale pressed on, driven by a determination that bordered on obsession. They reached the center of the Void, a place where the laws of physics ceased to exist. There they found the source of the darkness, a massive, pulsating entity, a living singularity that seemed to radiate malice. Ilara activated the counter-signal. For a moment it seemed to work. The Void recoiled, its tendrils of darkness retreating. But then the entity struck back. It lashed out at the ship, tearing through its hull and killing most of the crew. Cale managed to get Ilara to an escape pod. But he was too late. The entity had already taken hold of her mind. As the escape pod jettisoned, Kyle watched in horror as Ilara's eyes turned black, her body convulsing as the entity consumed her. Her final words, transmitted to the Remnant, were a warning. It's not just the Void, it's a prison. And we've opened the door. The counter-signal failed. The Void continued to spread, consuming everything in its path. The Remnant's last stronghold, a hidden base on the moon of Titan, fell within days. The survivors scattered, fleeing into the unknown reaches of the galaxy. But the story does not end there. In the darkest corners of space, whispers began to spread. Stories of a ship adrift in the Void, its crew transformed into something other. They called it the Eclipse, and they said it carried a message, a warning, or perhaps a promise. The Void is not the end. It is a gateway, and beyond it lies something far worse. Prepare yourselves. The darkness is coming, and it is only the beginning. The darkness is coming, and it is only the beginning. The whispers of the eclipse grew louder, spreading like a virus through the remnants of civilization. Those who heard them spoke of a ship that was no longer a ship, a crew that was no longer human. They said the eclipse moved through the void like a ghost, its hull shimmering with an otherworldly light, its engines silent, yet impossibly fast. And they said it was searching for something, or someone. The remnant, what little remained of it, was divided. Some believed the eclipse was a beacon of hope, a sign that the fight against the void was not yet lost. Others saw it as a harbinger of doom, a warning that the worst was yet to come. But one thing was certain: the eclipse was real. And it was coming. The first confirmed sighting came from the ruins of Proxima Centauri, once a thriving colony, now a graveyard. A scavenger ship, desperate for supplies, picked up a faint signal on its scanners. At first, they thought it was a distress call, but as they drew closer, they realized it was something else entirely. The eclipse emerged from the pool, void like a specter, its hull scarred and twisted, its lights flickering erratically. The scavengers tried to hail it, but there was no response. Instead, the ship began to transmit a message, a looping audio file, filled with static and distorted voices. "This is Dr. Ilara Voss of the Eclipse. If you are hearing this, do not approach. Repeat, do not approach. The void is not what we thought. It is alive, it is aware, and it is learning." The scavengers fled, but not before capturing footage of the eclipse. The images were grainy, distorted but unmistakable. The ship's hull was covered in strange organic growths, pulsating with a faint, sickly glow. And in the shadows of its corridors, something moved, something that was not human. The footage spread like wildfire, igniting fear and panic across the galaxy. The remnant's leaders tried to suppress it, but it was too late. The truth was out. The eclipse was no longer under human control. It had become something else, something dangerous. And then the attacks began. Colonies on the fringes of known space reported strange phenomena. Ships vanishing without a trace. Entire populations disappearing overnight. Survivors spoke of shadows moving in the darkness, of whispers that drove them mad, of a ship that appeared without warning and left only death in its wake. The remnant sent a task force to investigate, led by Commander Jara Tal, a veteran of the Federation Navy. What they found defied explanation. The eclipse was no longer alone. It had been joined by other ships, derelicts, scavengers, even former Federation vessels, all twisted and corrupted by the void. They moved in unison, a fleet of nightmares, their hulls pulsating with the same sickly glow. And at their center, the eclipse loomed like a dark star, its presence radiating an almost palpable malevolence. Commander Tal's task force engaged the fleet, but it was a futile effort. Their weapons had no effect. Their ships were torn apart. Their crews consumed by the darkness. Tal's final transmission was a single desperate plea. It's not just the ships. It's the void itself. It's alive. And it's coming for us all. The remnant's leaders were at a loss. They had no weapons, no strategy, no hope. The void was unstoppable, and the eclipse was its herald. But amidst the despair, a new theory emerged, one that offered a glimmer of hope, however faint. Dr. Rin Kyle, a former colleague of Ilara Voss, proposed that the eclipse was not an enemy, but a weapon. He believed that Ilara had succeeded in her mission, that the counter-signal had worked, but not in the way they had expected. The eclipse had been transformed, yes, but not corrupted. It had become a living weapon, a vessel for the void's own power turned against itself. Kale's theory was met with skepticism, but it was the only hope they had. The remnant began to search for a way to communicate with the eclipse, to harness its power and use it against the void. But time was running out. The void was spreading faster than ever, consuming entire star systems in its wake. The remnant's last stronghold, a hidden base on the moon of Titan, was under siege. The Eclipse and its fleet were closing in, their presence casting a shadow over the galaxy. And then, as the end seemed inevitable, the Eclipse appeared. It emerged from the void above Titan, its hull glowing with an eerie light. The remnant's forces braced for an attack, but none came. Instead, the Eclipse began to transmit a new message, a single repeating phrase, "The key is within." No one knew what it meant. But as the void closed in, as the shadows swallowed the stars, the remnant had no choice but to find out. The darkness is coming, and the Eclipse holds the key. Prepare yourselves. The end is only the beginning. The end is only the beginning. The remnant, battered and broken, gathered in the depths of their Titan stronghold. The Eclipse loomed above them, its eerie light casting long shadows across the moon's surface. The message, "The key is within," echoed through their minds, a riddle they could not ignore. But what did it mean? And who, or what, held the key? Dr. Rin Kale, the scientist who had first proposed the Eclipse might be a weapon, took charge. He argued that the key was not a physical object but something deeper, a piece of the Nexus perhaps, or a fragment of the void itself. He believed the Eclipse was trying to communicate, to guide them toward a solution. But time was running out. The void's tendrils were closing in, and the Eclipse's fleet of corrupted ships was growing larger by the hour. A small team was assembled to board the Eclipse. It was a desperate move, but the remnant had no other options. The team consisted of Kale, Commander Jara Tal, who had miraculously survived her previous encounter with the void, and a handful of volunteers. They knew the odds were against them. The Eclipse was no longer a ship. It was a living, breathing entity, a fusion of metal and void energy. But they had to try. The boarding was a nightmare. The Eclipse's hull pulsed like a heartbeat, its surface slick with an oily, organic substance. The team's suits hissed as the substance ate away at the material, and the air inside the ship was thick with a choking, acrid mist. The corridors were twisted and warped, as if the ship itself was alive and hostile. They found Dr. Ilara Voss in what had once been the ship's bridge. She was no longer human. Her body was fused with the ship, her skin translucent and glowing, with the same sickly light as the Eclipse. Her eyes were black voids, but she still spoke, her voice a haunting echo of the woman she had once been. "You're too late," she said. "The key is not for you. It is for them." "Who?" Kyle demanded. "Who are they?" Ilara's head tilted unnaturally, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the ship. "The ones who built the Nexus, the ones who imprisoned the void. They are coming, and they will judge us all." Before Kale could respond, the ship shuddered, violently. The walls began to dissolve, revealing a vast, endless darkness beyond. The void was no longer outside the ship, it was inside, consuming everything in its path. "Go," Ilara whispered. "Take the key, use it, but know this. The void is not the enemy. It is a weapon, and it has been unleashed." Kale hesitated, but Commander Tal grabbed his arm. "We need to move, now!" They fled the bridge as the Eclipse began to collapse around them. The key, a small, crystalline object embedded in Ilara's chest, was their only hope. But as they reached their shuttle, they realized the truth. The key was not a weapon. It was a map. The crystal projected a holographic image of the galaxy, with a single point of light pulsing at its center. It was a star system, one that had been hidden from all known charts. The system's name flashed briefly in an ancient, alien script before fading away. The remnant's leaders debated their next move. Some argued for an immediate expedition to the hidden system, while others feared it was a trap. But the void was spreading faster than ever, and the Eclipse's fleet was closing in. They had no choice. A new mission was launched, codenamed Exodus. The Remnant's last remaining ships, loaded with survivors and supplies, set course for the hidden system. The journey was fraught with danger, as the Void's influence grew stronger the closer they got. Ships vanished without a trace, their crews lost to the darkness. But those who survived pressed on, driven by the hope that the key would lead them to salvation. When they finally reached the system, they found something they could never have imagined. At its center was a massive structure, far larger than the Nexus. It was a Dyson sphere, its surface covered in intricate patterns that pulsed with light. And at its heart was a gateway, a portal to another dimension. The Remnant scientists quickly realized the truth. The Nexus had been a test, a way to determine if a species was worthy of wielding the power of the Void. The Dyson sphere was the real key, a tool created by an ancient civilization to control the Void and protect the galaxy from its destructive power. But there was a catch. The gateway could only be activated by a living being, a sacrifice. Someone would have to merge with the sphere, becoming its guardian and warden. Commander Jara Tal volunteered without hesitation. "I've faced the Void before," she said. "I'll do it again." The process was agonizing. Tal's body was fused with the sphere, her mind connected to its vast network. She became something more than human, a being of light and energy. And as the gateway opened, the Void began to recede, its tendrils pulled back into the portal. But the victory came at a cost. The gateway could not be closed. The Void was still out there, waiting. And Tal's final message to the Remnant was a warning. This is not over. The Void is not defeated. It is waiting. And one day, it will return. The Remnant settled in the hidden system, building a new civilization around the Dyson sphere. They called it Sanctuary, a place of safety in a galaxy consumed by darkness, but they knew it was only a temporary reprieve. The darkness is coming, and when it returns, the galaxy will be ready, or it will fall. Prepare yourselves. The end is only the beginning. The end is only the beginning. Sanctuary thrived in the shadow of the Dyson sphere, a beacon of hope in a galaxy still scarred by the Void. The Remnant, now calling themselves the Guardians, worked tirelessly to rebuild and prepare for the inevitable return of the darkness. Commander Jara Tal, now the living heart of the sphere, watched over them, her consciousness intertwined with the ancient technology. She was no longer human, but she was not entirely lost. Her voice echoed through the sphere's systems, guiding and warning, a constant reminder of the price they had paid for survival. But the galaxy was vast, and the Void was patient. The first signs of its return came from the edges of known space. Scattered reports from distant colonies spoke of strange phenomena, stars flickering and dying, planets vanishing without a trace, and whispers of a shadow that moved against the light. The Guardians sent scouts to investigate, but few returned. Those who did spoke of horrors beyond comprehension, entire systems consumed by the Void, their populations transformed into twisted, mindless husks. The Void was no longer a passive force. It had learned, it had adapted, and it was hunting. Dr. Rin Kale, now the chief scientist of Sanctuary, worked tirelessly to understand the Void's new behavior. He studied the data from the scouts, analyzed the patterns of destruction, and consulted with Jara Tal through the sphere's network. What he discovered chilled him to the core. The Void is not just a weapon, he told the Guardians' Council. It's a predator, and it's evolving. It's learning how to break through the sphere's defenses. The Council was silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. They had always known the Void would return, but they had hoped for more time. Time to prepare, to fortify, to find a way to close the gateway once and for all. But time was a luxury they no longer had. The Void's advance was relentless. System by system, it consumed everything in its path, growing stronger with each victory. The Guardians' fleets, though formidable, were no match for its power. Ships were torn apart, their crews absorbed into the darkness. Colonies fell, their populations either destroyed or transformed into agents of the Void. And then, the Void reached Sanctuary. The attack came without warning. One moment, the system was calm, the Dyson sphere pulsing gently, with light. The next, the sky was filled with shadows, the Void's tendrils reaching out to engulf the sphere. The Guardians fought valiantly, their ships and defenses pushing back against the darkness. But it was not enough. The Void was too powerful, too vast. Jara Tal's voice echoed through the sphere, calm but urgent. The gateway is failing. The Void is breaking through. You must leave, now. The Guardians hesitated. Sanctuary was their home, their last refuge, but they knew she was right. If the Void breached the sphere, it would consume them all. As the evacuation began, Dr. Kyle made his way to the sphere's core. He found Jara Tal there, her form flickering with light, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You have to come with us," he said. "We can't leave you here." She shook her head. "I am the sphere. If I leave, the gateway will collapse, and the Void will be free to consume the galaxy. I have to stay." Kyle's heart ached, but he knew she was right. He placed a hand on the sphere's surface, feeling the warmth of her presence. "We'll find a way to stop it. I promise." She smiled, a faint, sad smile. "I know you will. But remember, the Void is not the enemy. It is a tool, and tools can be turned against their masters." Before Kale could respond, the sphere shuddered violently. The Void's tendrils were closing in, their darkness spreading across the surface. Jara Tal's form began to dissolve, her light fading into the shadows. "Go," she whispered. "And tell them, the end is only the beginning." Kale fled the core as the sphere began to collapse. The last of the Guardians' ships were already leaving, their engines flaring as they escaped the system. He watched from the bridge of his ship as the Dyson sphere was consumed by the Void, its light extinguished, its gateway shattered. But, as the darkness closed in, something unexpected happened. A pulse of energy erupted from the sphere's core, a burst of light that pushed back the Void's tendrils. For a moment, the darkness receded, and the galaxy was filled with a blinding, radiant light. And then, it was gone. The Void retreated, its tendrils withdrawing into the shadows. The Guardians' ships were left drifting in the silence, their crews stunned and uncertain. Dr. Kale stared at the empty space where the sphere had been, his mind racing. Jara Tal's final words echoed in his thoughts. The end is only the beginning. He didn't know what she had done, or how she had done it. But he knew one thing. The fight was not over. The Void was still out there, waiting. And now, so were they. The Guardians regrouped, their resolve stronger than ever. They had lost Sanctuary, but they had gained something far more valuable. Hope. The darkness is coming, and when it returns, the galaxy will be ready. Prepare yourselves. The end is only the beginning.